In section 26 of Counsels and Maxims, Schopenhauer discusses some of the social consequences of the common run of people being rather shallow and self-centered. Since they are incapable of taking an objective view of things, they filter all conversations and all interactions through the lens of their own subjective interests. Here's what he writes. Most men are so thoroughly subjective that nothing really interests them but themselves. They always think of their own case as soon as ever any remark is made, and their whole attention is engrossed and absorbed by the merest chance reference to anything which affects them personally, be it never so remote, with the result that they have no power left for forming an objective view of things. Should the conversation take that turn, neither can they admit any validity in arguments which tell against their interest or their vanity. Hence their attention is easily distracted. They are so readily offended, insulted, and annoyed that in discussing any impersonal matter with them, no care is too great to avoid letting your remarks bear the slightest possible reference to the very worthy and sensitive individuals whom you have before you. For anything you may say will perhaps hurt their feelings. People really care about nothing that does not affect them personally. True and striking observations, fine, subtle, and witty things are lost upon them. They cannot understand or feel them. But anything that disturbs their petty vanity in the most remote and indirect way, or reflects prejudicially upon their exceedingly precious selves, to that they are most tenderly sensitive. In this respect, they are like the little dog whose toes you are so apt to tread upon inadvertently. You know it by the shrill bark it sets up. Or again, they resemble a sick man covered with sores and boils, with whom the greatest care must be taken to avoid unnecessary handling. And in some people, this feeling reaches such a pass that, if they are talking with anyone, and he exhibits, or does not sufficiently conceal, his intelligence and discernment, they look upon it as a downright insult, although for the moment they hide their ill will, and the unsuspecting author of it afterward ruminates in vain upon their conduct, and racks his brains to discover what in the world he could have done to excite their malice and hatred. But it is just as easy to flatter and win them over. And this is why their judgment is usually corrupt, and why their opinions are swayed, not by what is really true and right, but by the favor of the party or class to which they belong. And the ultimate reason of it all is that in such people, force of will greatly predominates over knowledge, and hence their meager intellect is wholly given up to the service of the will, and can never free itself from that service for a moment. Astrology furnishes a magnificent proof of this miserable subjective tendency in men, which leads them to see everything only as bearing upon themselves, and to think of nothing that is not straightway made into a personal matter. The aim of astrology is to bring the motions of these celestial bodies into relation with the wretched ego, and to establish a connection between a comet in the sky and squabbles and rascalities here on earth. That's the end of section 26. An interesting set of observations, I think, about subjectivity and objectivity. People self-centered and shallow, incapable of objective thinking. The person who does think that way, the philosopher, perhaps the Schopenhauerian, needs to take warning that such people will take offense at anything that seems to reflect poorly upon themselves. They're very, very sensitive, being so thoroughly, how shall I say this, so thoroughly embedded in their own personal affairs. They can't see anything as being impersonal or non-personal. So one ought to be careful how one speaks about them. On the other hand, says Schopenhauer, they're very easy to manipulate because they don't take account of the truth of things. They take account of party advantage or vanity and petty concerns like that. I think one more interesting thing about this section is the way that Schopenhauer identifies the common, the petty, the vulgar, the self-centered and shallow with strength of will, just the opposite of what we would expect from Nietzsche, coming sometime later and under some influence from Schopenhauer. Here, being allied to the will dominating over the intellect, is a bad thing for Schopenhauer. For Nietzsche, the will, something much more creative in terms of will to power. And we can recall that Nietzsche defines his will to power in contrast to what he says in Schopenhauer is the will to nothingness, the will to the annihilation of the self. So here, the ego is taken as being, the focus on the ego is taken to being a feature of the worst sort of people. In Nietzsche, it seems like it may be an element of a better sort of person. So an interesting contrast there. But still, Schopenhauer, I think, still witty throughout his comparison of these type of people to a little dog which barks when you step on its toes, or, rather more disgustingly, a man covered with boils whom you have to be very delicate with so that you don't move him more than you need to and get any of that stuff on you. So that's section 26 of Schopenhauer's Counsels and Maxims. We'll talk about section 27 in the next video. Thanks for watching today. Goodbye.